What's the best example of docu-money you've seen? Kerry Packer. He frequented a particular casino often. One night after a good run he wanted to tip the dealer. She declined as per casino policy. So he asked to see her supervisor, who affirmed that it was against company policy for employees to accept tips from clientele. He demanded that they fire her or he'd never come back. They obliged. He then said, well, now she's not an employee, I can tip her, and gave her a ridiculous sum of money. The supervisor obliged. Kerry then said, hire her back again or I'll never come back to your casino. She got her job back and pocketed the tip. My friend's mother-in-law has a wonderful home on Cape Cod. It's not one of the huge McMansion eyesores that started showing up in nearby towns in the 1980s. It's just a very comfortable, well-designed, 3-bed 2-bath house on a hillside with lots of beautiful hand-hewn woodwork and an incredible view of the coast just a couple streets downhill. The house was built in the mid-1950s, and while there aren't many strict legal boundaries regarding what can and cannot be built, renovated, expanded, or demolished, the folks in this community have been happily coexisting so well for the past 75 plus years that you can count the number of incidents on one hand, and everyone knows who tried to do what with their house or their land. The neighbor who lived one street downhill between my pal's mill and the coast sadly passed away during the COVID pandemic, and because his children had moved away, the property went to market and was immediately snatched up well over asking price by some Boston-based tech bro. Within a month he'd started demolishing the retaining walls and driveway to allow access for the general contractor he'd hired to tear down the existing house, which had been meticulously cared for and looked right at home in the neighborhood, and raise a new concrete and glass monstrosity that would have completely severed the line of sight to the coast for at least 4 houses located uphill. I wasn't aware of the means available to my buddy's mill, but after a few neighbors introduced themselves to this new arrival to the area and expressed their concerns, she cut him a check for 5% above what he paid for the house. No loans, no remortgage on her existing home, no payment plan, just bought it outright for more than I'll earn in the next 25 years even if I'm lucky. The downhill house is now rented well below market value to lovely family with 2 kids. Guy I used to work for thought it would be funny to hire a limo to take a friend to lunch. The restaurant was literally next door to where they were. Limo company refused to rent by the hour and said he had to hire it for the entire day. Guy was angry so just bought a limo. After lunch he was still angry and decided to just buy a few more and start his own limo company. Month or two later he bought the company that refused him an hourly rental. Ferraccio Lamborghini. Back in the days he got rich building tractors, and he bought himself a Ferrari, because he's Italian, and it was the thing to do when you became successful. Unfortunately, sports car clutches back then were crap, and failed often. He went to Ferrari himself and said he could fix the problem, and was told to go back to his tractors because he knew nothing about high performance cars. The wiki says he made cars to compete with Ferrari and the others, but in reality, he did it to spite Ferrari. Starting a car factory to spite someone, epic level of docu. Somewhat related, there's also the development of the Ford GT. At one point, Ford was in talks to buy Ferrari, but Ferrari had no intention of selling to Ford, instead using the talks with Ford to drive up the price when he sold to Fiat, but the deal ensured that Enzo Ferrari would maintain control of Ferrari's racing division. Out of pure spite, Ford spent an absurd amount of money to develop the Ford GT40 to end Ferrari's winning streak at the 24-hour Le Mans. Basically, a lot of development in motorsport and sports cars has been done purely to give Enzo Ferrari the middle finger. Billionaire Howard Hughes reserved the top 2 floors of the Desert Inn in Las Vegas for 10 days. When his 10 days were up, the hotel asked him to check out. He wasn't ready to leave, so he bought the hotel and stayed there for 4 years. My favorite thing he did was buying a local television station so he could call them up at night and tell them to play whatever movie he felt like watching, like it was his own private Netflix decades before streaming existed. He made them play Ice Station Zebra over 100 times. I used to work with companies that build super yachts. It happened several times that the interior of a vessel has been finished in 500k plus worth of marble, after which the owner walks in, decides he doesn't like the color in hindsight and requests it all to be removed again. My brother, also, worked for a super yacht company in New Orleans. An owner's wife showed up to give final approval on a finished boat only to announce the interior was the wrong shade of pink. She wanted blush, not bashful. So, most of the boat had to be disassembled so that they could repaint the entire interior. I'm an employment and contract attorney. In my younger days I was corp counsel for a large hospital. We were in the midst of a fundraising campaign and were a few million from our goal. Got a call from a wealthy, youngish guy. Offered to cover the remainder plus 10% with 2 stipulations. He used to work at the hospital when he was younger and made it rich with the medical device company he started. So he wanted a voting member board seat. And he wanted to fire this vice president who was his supervisor when he worked there and had made his life miserable. He was the reason he quit and eventually into business for himself. Took it to the board and CEO. They agreed to the board seat. I couldn't advise they allow the firing for liability purposes. However, the CEO decided to reorganize certain departments and coincidentally this VP's position was eliminated. The new board member chaired the committee that made the call on the reorganization and informed the VP of the changes. That was the biggest long-term grudge I ever saw. The Abu Dhabi royal family bankrolling and slapping their name, Khalifa, on the world's tallest building. Dubai ran out of money to complete it. So that's why they stopped calling it the Burj Dubai halfway through construction. I was a nerdy kid who liked architecture, so I followed along, but not very well I guess. I met a dude in rehab who was so rich that after group he flew the rest of us across state lines on a jet he had just ready to go and took us skydiving and got us back home before our sober living curfew. When we landed at that other airport the instructors already knew and had our parachutes and gear laying out ready to get everyone prepared, like he just told them, yo, me and 10 friends gonna skydive in a few hours, be ready for us. He did this all on a whim to that day, lol. Some of the people totally had warrants and were not supposed to travel at all, especially across state lines, so the house manager was not happy. That dude was a homie. Some of the other people totally tried to abuse his generosity, but I genuinely just liked that dude. He tried to buy me dinner but I refused to not pay my half because he was just so ducking generous and caring. I felt bad. Sad he was going through shit because he was so nice and generous with his money. I went to his giant as expensive Orange County mansion with him too, and he made me the best steak I've ever had in my life. Hope he's doing good. I worked at a high-end eco resort some time ago. We spent weeks preparing for some guests who'd booked up half the resort for him and his family. Doing a bunch of renovations and changes in the cabins and rooms because the guy was very picky, but he was spending a lot, so whatever. We even rebuilt the motor on another boat and outfitted it for down rigging because they needed 3 fishing boats. The guy shows up for his reservation, and first thing he does is start cussing out and belittling the girl at the front desk. The owner walked in to see what his problem was and the guy proceeded to cheat on the front desk girl to him. So the owner just said, "I'm terribly sorry you feel that way. We will give you a full return on your deposit so you can find somewhere better to stay." The guy's face goes white, and he starts apologizing and pleading with him, but the owner didn't care. The guy had to go out to the parking lot and explain to his entire family how his garbage temper ducked up their 1-week vacation and they'd have to find somewhere else to stay. The owner couldn't give a duck how much extra money he had spent. He wasn't taking that sheet, and more importantly, he wasn't going to make the staff take that shift. He wasn't my favorite boss, but that is something I respect. My friend knows a guy that flew his private jet from London to France for lunch. When he finished lunch, his jet was having some maintenance issues. Rather than waiting the 2-3 hours for them to figure it out, He approached a less rich private jet owner and offered them a big enough check for it to be worth their inconvenience to sell him their jet on the spot. So in real life, a family friend of ours who owns a very successful national company. His wife's Jaguar, sports coupe type, was stolen out of their driveway. He noticed at about 6 AM when he got up for work. He called the Jaguar dealer principal, first name basis, mobile number, and had a new replacement car there by lunchtime in exactly the same color and trims. His wife apparently didn't notice until about 4 days later when the police turned up with what was left of her Jaguar. Good times. I knew a guy who owned a machine shop factory next to an industrial complex I managed. I met him when I was on site at about 6 AM, and he was walking through the gates. He was dressed like a homeless man, and told me he used to use our gates as a shortcut to get to his factory. He would wander through and then slip through a hole in the fence to access his factory because he couldn't be bothered walking around. Anyway, got talking and it turned out he lived in the area, which at this time was a pretty rough area, full of industrial land and some rough residential areas, because his family used to own all the land around when it was farmland and had gradually sold it off, but he stayed in the family home. Short version, he was a very wealthy man. He was mad as a cut snake, but pretty canny and seriously rich. He told me the story that he had neighbors who had moved in and were parking their cars on his driveway. He asked them to stop, they didn't. He knew they were renting, so he bought the house and evicted them. My uncle made a bunch of money in investment banking. Seemingly out of the blue he decided to buy a chain of shops he was fired from for catching his manager having an affair with another employee. He bought the shop with a partner. The shop owner and the managers only ever saw the other partner. He said he made it a point of the deal to keep the personnel in place after the sale. First day after taking ownership he walks in and fires the manager that fired him. Then gave everyone else raises and made sure the ex-employee heard about it. This is more of a you should reconsider rather than a proper ducky. Growing up, our neighbor was incredibly wealthy, probably in the low 9 figures, owned a tremendous amount of land and could probably influence the price of beef with the amount of cattle he had, and oil, of course. He was in his 80s, health was deteriorating, so his kids showed up while he was recovering from surgery and explained to him they didn't want him driving anymore and took his truck. Soon as they left he called a local dealership and had a brand new truck dropped off an hour later. Kids came back over the next day and he just told them he decided he wanted to keep driving and was fine buying another new truck every day if he had to. Cristiano Ronaldo, buying an island and moving his family onto it at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a disabled daughter and were able to put her through a private preschool for free in exchange for helping speak at the good things the school did for our daughter. We were speakers at their big charity bowl and got placed at a rich table where everyone ate our story up. We were pretty poor at the time and were literally putting the fancy rolls in my wife's purse. We get to the auction portion of the night and one of the ladies told us that last year she won the auction for an all expense paid first class luxury safari down in Africa, but she had no one to go with her so she donated it back to the school this year. Halfway through the bidding of the safari she donated after paying for she goes, "Oh my niece, she loves animals, I could have taken her," and went and won it again. She bid $15K that night, and she said about $12K to win it the first time, and that was 20 years ago. We went home and used those rolls to spruce up our Carl-budded crappy deli meat sandwiches for the next week. When I was 15 I was riding with my good friend and his incredibly wealthy family to a theme park when his car, a Mercedes with all the upgrades, started making a weird noise. He pulled into a gas station and the car wouldn't start. His eldest son came and picked us up and I didn't think anything out of the ordinary. Later that day I found out that he left the car in the parking lot and went and bought a brand new one. A former boss of mine was going through a contentious divorce. Her husband had skipped town down to Florida with some skank, ditching my boss and their son. Eventually when the divorce was being finalized, it came to the point where they had to divide assets. She was the primary breadwinner and the judge ruled that she had to either give him one of her vehicles, she had several large trucks, or buy him a new one. Her husband was no smell free, he stood 6 feet 7 inches and was a former bodybuilder. So, rather than give her one of her many trucks, she bought him a completely brand new Toyota Prius. This huge man looked like he was driving a clown car around town and it was hilarious. I know somebody who tried to build a giant garage in their backyard to conduct their business out of. The neighbor complained to the town planning board and managed to block construction. He bought the empty land next to the neighbor's house and donated it to Habitat for Humanity so that they'd build a house there just to piss off the neighbor. He then managed to get some tweaked plans through the planning board for his giant garage to hold his sailboat that didn't exist. I had a boss who would take the whole team out to dinner, order every appetizer and dessert on the menu for everyone, and expect us to order an entree on top of that. She gave my supervisor her black card for drinks for the team, including the interns, and told her to return it on Monday. I want to be that rich and awesome someday. Recently found out Jeff Bezos was sitting in his living room and randomly had the idea to find the Apollo 11 engines from the bottom of the Atlantic. He bought all the equipment, assembled a team and went and found it. Then donated them to the Smithsonian. They are on display about 30 feet from the Apollo 11 command module, Neil's lunar suit, and Eugene Cernan's boots, the last man-made thing to leave the lunar surface. I honestly thought this was a joke entry making Bezos a modern Howard Hughes, but I guess he is. Used to work for a financial services company. CEO was a very rich guy. Not a household name, but consistently made the Forbes top 10 for the wealthiest people in the state. He was a billionaire. Anyway, we were moving office spaces, and his assistants were packing up his office and files. One day the assistant brought over a folder with paperwork for a boat. She asked him if he still owned this boat, or if she could throw out the documents. He did not know if he still owned the boat. He could not remember for the life of him, and said he would have to reach out to somebody to confirm. How much money do you have to have? How many boats have you accumulated to forget something like this? Here in the States, I was at a FedEx store and the family ahead of me had a rather large box, like a solid 36x36x36. I heard them say with a British accent the address it was to be sent to in the UK. Seems normal so far, right? Cashier asked when he wanted it to arrive. Note, this was at about noon. He said tomorrow with a straight face. The cashier sort of laughed and said something like, so, that's gonna be about $1,200. Customer simply said, that's fine, and handed over his black Amex. My jaw hit the floor. Edit, for the couple replies saying this isn't that odd. It was a stereo set up for his brother's birthday. Yes, that's pretty baller. My client discussing their tab from brunch at a champagne party in Aspen 1. That tab seemed kinda high. $36K? 2. Now there was the cover with the first tray of 4 bottles, then we got the one for those girls, then we got 2 more for us, and 1 for the guys from company 1. I guess that tracks. Plus the reserve that nobody got to drink because Mark sprayed it all over those Instagram modes. 3. How the duck was I supposed to know it was an $8,000 bottle? 2. Because it said 1947 on the bottle in big letters. 3. Whatever. I'll get dinner or something and we'll call it even, casually implying dinner will be another $36K. I don't know if this counts, but I've seen people in really nice cars or with special plates, who park on purpose in prohibited spots, not handicapped spots, for long periods of time, preferring to just get the ticket and to struggle to find a spot or go to the next nearest parking lot. I think could be an example of duck you money, to rather spend $120 for a fine than suffering the burden of walking from their cars. My oldest brother. He's the best big brother I could ever ask for even before he made it big. His only job in his life has been working for Kroger starting when he was 16. He's some big wig now in Cincinnati at the corporate shop and gave me a bottle of whiskey worth over 20 grand because he couldn't find a place for it in his bar cabinet in his vacation house in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. As an older brother, sounds just like he wanted to give the bottle, whether he had space or not. I'm a structural engineer. I was working on a rich guy's house and he asked me for ideas to make his main staircase stand out a little more, but at that point the project had gone on way too long and basically just needed to end. So I pulled out a few pictures of this ridiculous feature staircase I'd designed for a hotel, and told him it would probably cost $100K, which is like double, if not triple, but I was trying to scare him off, and probably wasn't worth it, but that he could get the same look cladding the regular one we'd already designed for him. The mofo thought about it for 10 seconds and said, "I love it, do it." I thought I was highballing him so hard that he'd give up and move on. After I told the architect, he laughed at me and told me like 5 other things in the house that were going to be unnecessarily customized just to stand out. Custom lighting fixtures, one off in between sizes and colors. This guy apparently was willing to spend $1 million just to have random stuff exactly the way he wanted it. My dad used to do handyman work for a fairly rich guy. He had a house in the hills, with quite a few acres. Someone bought one of the hills next to him, and started building a house. He didn't like how it looked, so he bought it from them and halted construction and had all traces of construction removed. Then, he didn't like how much land was surrounding him, with no fence. His property line was now too far to see. So he just had a fence put in, across the middle of his land, so he could see a fence. About 20 years ago, I worked the flight line at FBO, basically, a place at the airport where private planes park and get service, etc. I worked at a more upscale FBO, so we mostly handled citations, Gulf Streams, and the like, private jets. One day, a customer who was repeatedly described to me as the Prince of Saudi Arabia came in on his personal DC-10. This thing was huge and complicated compared to most of our customers, in part because it was a special, head of a state with money tricked out DC-10. Among other things visible from the exterior, was a full suite of military countermeasures, missile jammers, chaff flares, and several others I couldn't identify. He was only scheduled to be there a few days. On his planned departure date, he rolls up with an entourage in Bentleys, steps out, then before boarding says, "I want to go shopping." The entourage packs up and ducks off, just like that. Days go by. Then a week. Then 2. Management raises their daily cost for parking considerably, charging thousands a day, but the prince doesn't care. Day in and day out, we stare at this billionaire's plane sitting there, telling each other our theories about what was inside. A month goes by. Then one day, all hands on deck, the prince wants to leave. Tonight. We have to prep a DC-10 with full amenities in just a few hours. We were scrambling, getting her fueled up, running through checks, servicing the shitters, etc. When the catering folks needed a hand, we all volunteered to help so we could get a look at the inside of the plane. I enter and on my left is the cockpit. Behind the cockpit is an armored security room that looks like something from Crimson Tide, a bunch of screens with radar, cameras, controls for all the fancy military toys, etc. I turn right and the walkway is a narrow corridor, which walks past the prince's private room. Behind the private room was a lounge with a coffee bar, couches, lots of artwork and gold trim. Further back was a more traditional airline cabin with business class sized seats for about 30-40 staffers. I'll never forget what I saw when I looked into the prince's private room. It was like something out of a Judd Apatow movie, like it was a parody of itself. In the center was a king-sized bed covered with satin sheets and a tiger fur blanket. The ceiling above the bed was, I shit you not, a mirror. The room was dimly lit in warm red and orange tones with opulent plush furniture and expensive looking decorations. To cap it all off, was a portrait of the prince in a military uniform hanging directly over the bed. So yeah, there are private jets, and then money jets. Worked for a BMW dealership. Customer came in during a sales event. Saw a fully loaded X5M in the showroom, had a look at it and told the salesman, I don't have one that's red with red leather interior, I'll take it. He bought it outright and put it on the trailer he brought with him to take it home. Didn't even test drive it. It was almost $200 K CAD, so about $140 K USD. My ex worked at a very expensive, very private golf course. One day a few members are playing poker in the lounge for $5.10 a hand. In walks this hotshot new member who asks to play. When he hears what they are playing for, he says something along the lines of, WTF's the point of that, we're all rich, let's play for real money. Nobody's really interested in this, they just want to play for fun, but the guy won't drop it. Finally, the oldest of the group says, okay, let's play, what's your net worth? To which the younger guy smugly replies, $2 million. The older guy goes, alright, let's play the next hand for $2 mil. Straight up, the younger guy gets all huffy, saying he just wanted to have fun. Why is the old guy being such a big dig? Old guy responds, I'm worth $30 mil, but I don't need to be an ass to prove it. Now shut up and play or get the duck out. The younger guy did not want to play, apparently cancelled his membership a week later. This story's lore grows with every retelling, but it's one of my favorites from growing up. There was a restaurant outside my small town. A billionaire was eating there without showing his status whatsoever at all. He asked for fries on the side of his meal instead of mashed potatoes. The waitress made a big deal about how the place didn't do substitutions. He politely pointed out that they had French fries on their menu, so he wasn't sure what the issue was. She reiterated that mashed potatoes was the assigned side for his meal and they wouldn't switch it. He escalated to a manager who said fries were no problem. That probably would have been the end of it, but the waitress wouldn't let it go, haranguing him throughout the meal, doing the thing where you talk loudly about someone within earshot of them, really talking to them. Just generally being obnoxious for no reason, making a big deal of nothing. So, he quietly bought the restaurant for twice what it was worth, allowing the owners to retire early, and fired this woman. Back in 2008, the UAE paid more than $1 billion to bail out the city of Chicago in a deal with Morgan Stanley and Mayor Daley, in exchange for the profits of the 36,000 parking meters for the next 75 years. That was a ridiculous deal and Chicago got hosed. They still have to pay the UAE whenever they want to shut a street, even for repairs, to compensate for the lost revenue. Don't forget the part where UAE had an insider on the city negotiating side and they agreed to the deal with little to no consideration and vastly undervalued the worth of the 36k meters. Also, the investors were sending wildly inflated bills for street closures. At the train station there's this toy train in a glass monter. My 4-year-old loves it. It costs 2 Danish kroners to make it run for like 30 seconds. It's located inside Joe and Amp, the juice, but it's rare you walk around with change in Denmark. So often kids can't see the train run. One day on my way home from work, this small guy was sobbing so quietly on the lap of his mother since it couldn't run. I turned 180, walked to the bank and got 250 krona coins. I gave the mother 5, and the dude at the counter the rest with instructions on giving free trips whenever kids came in. It's not a crazy spending spree, but I just got so pissed off all the missed moments kids could have. He wanted to surprise his mother for her birthday, so he flew from Spain to Hawaii to surprise her at the hotel she was staying at for her birthday, took her out to lunch, then flew back to Spain. He apparently decided he really liked Madrid so much about 15 years ago that he never really left when he visited for spring break. He seems to have enough in his trust fund that he doesn't ever have to worry about money, it's just there for him to spend on endless parties in Spain and flying to parties across Europe and Asia. He seemed genuinely perplexed that I didn't just buy my building when I complained about the cost of rent, like everyone has $350k just sitting around to casually spend. I went to a birthday party at a play center. As part of the package the kids got a little lunchbox with some chocolate, chips and the choice of either a jam, cheese or ham sandwich. The parents couldn't be bothered asking ahead of time which sandwiches the kids would want, so they bought each kid 3 lunchboxes, one of each, so they could just grab the one they wanted. I wasn't around for the meeting, but when my great-grandma died, my great-aunts were very argumentative about the costs of the funeral. It got to the point where they were arguing about the cost of something so fierce, my uncle just pulled out a few hundreds, slammed it on the table, and said it was covered. Apparently everybody shut up about it after that. I read an article about a Saudi princess who went on a $20 million shopping spree in Geneva. She needed 4 trucks to deliver everything to her home. She never opened or used the items. Some people are into retail therapy, others are into retail philanthropy. Mayo. Jeff Bezos spending $42 million to dig a ducking hole in a mountain to build the biggest clock that will last 10,000 years. The biggest one probably being the $44 billion Elon spent on Twitter just so he could post memes. Was standing in line at the post office and an elderly woman was asking everyone in line if she could pass through because she only needed 1 lottery ticket. Not asking very politely, that is. Making comments about people not moving fast enough, being disrespectful to the elderly, that kind of stuff. Hugh in first man in line. He heard her coming and was kind of done with her attitude. He asked the cashier how many lottery tickets there still were left for the lottery of that week. It were about 100 tickets. He bought them all. I went to a Midwestern wedding reception around 2007-8 that served alcohol. There was a beer that the couple picked and you could get one for free. Any more plus all other drinks were cash bar. The marrying couple were in their early 20s and were starting out in life with not much money. One of the groom's cousins, a senior level employee from Microsoft fresh in from Seattle, said duck that and announced he would pay for all drinks so everyone could enjoy themselves. He was shocked at how little the bill turned out to be relative to the size of the gathering, something like $3K for 250 people.